Games media has forced Black Myth Wukong out of the running for Game of the Year for 2024. Let's check it out.
Now, ever so often, there's a game that comes out that meets and exceeds the expectations of the players. It blows our minds. It's so good, but for some odd reason, it doesn't meet the same expectations for games media. Our interests aren't aligned. Our perspectives are not necessarily the same, and there's conflict in that. And I think that Black Myth Wukong is one of those games.
Yeah, there is always going to be this problem, right? Even game journalists, for example, there's so many examples of companies being kind of out of touch with the gamers and what gamers would actually want. It's bizarre. I don't know how they get to that point. I don't know if they just don't interact with their audiences or what. But yeah, this definitely happens too often, and if this is actually true that Black Myth Wukong is not in the running for Game of the Year, I'm going to be very upset. It absolutely deserves to win, straight up, in my opinion. I mean, it would probably be close, because there's been some banger games, but I don't know, it should at least be top 3.
And don't get me wrong, the game reviewed very well. It got over an 80 on most review sites, but with that said, up until the game's release, and then even after the game's release, it was under a constant barrage of negative criticism that had nothing to do with the game whatsoever.
Yes, I remember that. Black Myth Wukong was a controversial game. Controversial because there's stuff going on with the devs? It's a game! The game is separate from the devs. We need to keep social and political issues out of games, honestly. Yeah, you look at the game for an example of a good game. You don't look at the dev for an example of a good game. I know there's probably extreme cases where, you definitely look at certain things in a harsher light, depending on what happened. But, I mean, if you're wanting to look and see if a game is a good game, you look at how the game plays. You look at how the game feels. You don't look at what the developer's doing necessarily, It's weird. It's weird, the perspective.
And in that, the game never really got a fair shake, at least not in my eyes.
Yeah.
Now, 2024 has been an absolutely insane year for games. There are so many great games to play, and if you're one of those people that are out there that are like, gaming is dying, let me be the first to tell you, you need to play more games, or just not the...
True. Gaming is definitely not dying. It's doing better than ever, I swear. In certain regards, it's doing better than ever. AAA studios may be dying off or dying down in popularity, but there's these crazy, just out-of-nowhere studios, like with Black Myth Wukong in this game science studio, or for example Saber Interactive, which I had not really heard of before Space Marine 2, and then Space Marine 2 just blew it out of the water in a good way. Like, everybody knew about that studio now because of Space Marine 2. Yeah, maybe not these AAA studios, maybe they're not doing great like they have been, but there's other studios up and coming out of nowhere that are blowing us away, and so, I mean, I think it's a good year for games. Gaming is good right now.
Same ones over and over again. The list, once I get into some of the Game of the Year contenders, it's going to blow your mind, because I honestly forgot how many games even came out this year. This isn't about the award. It's about the recognition that these studios deserve, the reward they deserve, beyond just making money. It's making sure that it's known why these games are great, so that other publishers and studios can see, hey, this is what it is. This is how...
Yeah, I agree. The recognition is deserved for a game that just really blows people away, because it's obvious. It's obvious that the player base loves this game, right? Over 10 million copies sold. Over 10 million. So it could be, 10,500,000. It could be almost 11 million, but they don't want to say that, so they say 10 million, right? It's over 10 million. It's just crazy, the numbers that sold on this game, and the numbers of people that still play it. I just checked earlier, and on SteamDB, it shows almost 100,000, like 97,000 players still in the past 24-hour period playing Black Myth Wukong. It's obviously popular. People love this game. It absolutely deserves to be in the running for Game of the Year, in my opinion, because they deserve the credit. They deserve the award, the recognition,
We make a game that the players love, and it's not, again, just not the money. But already I'm starting to see games media want to preemptively push back about Black Myth Wukong being in the Game of the Year category, and we're going to talk about that.
Of course they got to push back. Of course they have to preemptively push back. They have to cover themselves because they know they're making a bad call. They know they're going to get hate for this because it is the wrong call.
We have had a monstrous year in games, and it's wild to think that it's not even over yet with more releases right around the corner. This is about the time of year that Game of the Year candidates are being discussed and debated, and this year we have a lot of difficult choices to make. Dragon's Dogma 2, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Helldivers 2, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, Prince of Persia The Lost Crown, Persona 3 Reloaded, Metaphor ReFantazio, and Silent Hill 2 Remake are among the highest scoring games that we've had from reviewers this year.
It really has been a banger year, guys. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It has been an insane year for gaming. And maybe not the best year for AAA. Maybe the time for AAA is dying out, or maybe they need to learn and adjust because of these other single A or double A studios, or even just indie studios that are coming out of nowhere and making these insane games. Maybe it's time for AAA to kind of rebuild and regrow, relearn, whatever you want to say, kind of refresh and, you know, change perspective. Hey, maybe we need to focus on making actually just insanely good games and stop focusing on the monetization so much. Even if that means these studios have to downsize like crazy, it's got to happen. They got to make good games to compete in this very competitive market.
That's 8 games when only 6 games can be qualified as candidates. We're not even mentioning the stockpile of games that were scored just under that, with titles like Stellar Blade, Black Myth Wukong, Tekken 8, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, Unicorn Overlord, Space Marine 2, and more. 2024 has been packed with games, but only a few titles are deserving of being crowned King of the Year, and for many players, that game is Black Myth Wukong.
Absolutely, and there's so many good reasons for that. I mean, the action, the combat is insanely good and crisp and clean. The animations are smooth. They match up with the hitboxes so nicely, and I mean, the cutscenes, the cinematics, I mean, you're really watching a movie experience when you play that game. It's absolutely incredible. It is so incredible. Who cares if it's linear if the game experience is good? I've heard that complaint before, like, oh, it's not open world like Elden Ring, it's too linear, whatever. So what? The game experience is good. Who cares if it's open world? There's way too many open world games now, and there's a lot of them that are empty and boring. So I'm kind of glad that it's more linear. At least it's a good game experience.
James Throtton of The Gamer penned an article titled, "If Black Myth Wukong isn't nominated for Game of the Year, fans are going to be insufferable." James writes, "Black Myth Wukong is a very good action game, taking the Souls-like formula and stretching it into a boss rush format. Its popularity even surpasses that of its inspirations, garnering millions of players in mere days. It's a genuine contender for the Game Awards, but with how stacked 2024 is shaping up to be, competition is fierce."
I can agree with that. The competition is fierce. It still deserves to be in the running, in my opinion, especially compared to some of the other options, maybe just because of my personal preference, probably, but yeah, I don't know. I can't believe that this game wouldn't be in the running.
Polygon recently updated its Game of the Year frontrunner list, while the Golden Joystick Awards announced its 6 nominees for this year's PC and console Game of the Year categories. Black Myth Wukong is nowhere to be seen outside of smaller categories, and so TikTok right now is a deluge of angry gamers declaring that games media is corrupt and that it's all a part of some wider conspiracy.
And maybe it is. I'm not afraid to delve into a little conspiracy theory now and then, and I mean, it definitely seems like it. Maybe they just don't like Chinese people over at games media. You never know. You never know what's going on over there. Why wouldn't they want Black Myth Wukong on the docket? It is a Chinese studio, you know? That definitely sets them apart from some of the other games that are out. I don't know, man. It's really bizarre.
The game was not rigged from the start, it's just been a very, very competitive year. This week alone, we've had Silent Hill 2 Remake, Metaphor ReFantazio, and Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, 3 critically acclaimed hits that are all vying for the spotlight with equal fervor.
And the only one out of these that I have seen and heard that could be on par with Black Myth Wukong in terms of just, not because it's exactly the same type of game or anything, but in terms of just overall gaming experience and love by the community, would probably be Metaphor ReFantazio. The other ones, I mean, sure, I've heard good things about Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, and I've heard good things about Silent Hill 2 Remake, but man, they're not on par with Black Myth Wukong. It's just, it really is a cut above. It's such an incredible game.
Earlier this year, we saw the launch of Astrobot, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, Tekken 8, Helldivers 2, and Dragon's Dogma. That's not to mention the stellar year it's been for indies. Black Myth Wukong, while good, we scored it 4 stars, just doesn't measure up to the greats. Hell, it's not even the best Souls-like this year. as that award goes to Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. For those that have used Wukong as fuel in a culture war since before it was even released,
I don't really think that DLC should be put up against full-on games in terms of like a Game of the Year award. Like, maybe it should have its own category, but it should not be able to compete in terms of Game of the Year. And I don't know if they already have a rule against that. I have no idea. I'm not sure. I'm just saying, because it was thrown out there, I just want to mention, I really don't think a DLC should ever be able to win a Game of the Year award, because it's not a full game. It just doesn't make sense to do that. If anything, there should be its own subcategory, or, you know, another secondary category for, you know, the best DLC of the year, something like that.
Absence on these lists is an attack. It's a ploy by Games Media for reasons, even though it has an open critic aggregate of 82. There's one big argument.
And, okay, and they bring in open critic aggregate, right? So, across the board, these people writing these articles, these people doing these critic scores, right? Maybe they are in cahoots. Maybe that's, you know, another conspiracy, right? Maybe they all agreed that it can't be given 90s and above because of reasons, right? You know, there's another side to this whole thing. It's not just that the players think that, you know, that it's a ploy by Games Media. This could be something going on with the actual critics too. So I don't know. There's multiple angles to look at here. It's not just, oh, it's a ploy by Games Media. Not necessarily.
Cropping up across Reddit and slowly replacing all the goth girls on my For You page as to why it deserves to be nominated. It sold well. James, I will speak for those that you are arguing against. Black Myth Wukong doesn't deserve to be nominated because of its sales. It deserves to be nominated because it is the first ever release from a studio, an inexperienced studio, that made a stunningly gorgeous game with great combat, a compelling story, beautiful music, incredibly detailed and culturally accurate environments, some of the most unique boss encounters I've seen in a game like this, and themes that we don't often see in games.
I'm glad he said all that. Really well worded, very nicely put, yes. And so, yes, it's true. Numbers don't always mean everything, right? You look at a player count, you look at the highest concurrent player count ever on Steam, or not ever, but so one of the highest is New World. New World is on that list, the MMO. 913,000 players at the all-time peak, right, when it was launched, and it has dropped off tremendously since then. So yes, there are examples of high numbers not necessarily meaning good game. But with Black Myth Wukong, it was, what, 2,400,000 players was the all-time peak. And still, to this day, in the last 24-hour period, there's been almost 100,000 players playing. And that's for a single-player game. This example I used was for an MMO, where, you know, thousands of players have content to play all the time together or whatever. But for a single-player game to have 100,000 players still is insane. That's really good. And then you go look at the Steam reviews, and those Steam reviews, even for the recent and the all-time, they match up 96% positive. People love this game. So it's not necessarily that high numbers are inaccurate. It's just, it depends on the numbers that you're looking at. And if you look at multiple sources like this, you know, over 10 million copies sold, 2,400,000 player peak, still 100,000 players over the past 24-hour period, and 96% positive ratings across recent reviews and all-time reviews on Steam, you just have to look at the right numbers to get the full perspective.
It was original, fresh, and most importantly, fun. And while many of the games that were mentioned in this article are incredible games, they are just copies of previous titles or even remakes. The industry should be celebrating and rewarding studios that work this hard, take a risk, and deliver something altogether new. And we're not even mentioning how the game sold at a fair price. I am so...
True. They could have gone with the choice, hey, we're trying to make a really stellar, like, insane experience. And I'm sure they knew, I'm sure they were aware, especially looking at the market of games like theirs, I'm sure they were aware how good their game was. And they could have just decided, hey, we're making a game that looks like a big budget title. We could make this $70. Nah, let's make it $60. Let's make it a little more affordable. Everybody else is going with that trend of 70. We'll keep ours at 60. I think that's awesome. Brand new game with such incredible high fidelity graphics, good combat, gameplay, and everything. Amazing story, and it's only $60. That's awesome.
Exhausted by this. Do you want to know why players think there's some grand conspiracy? Do you want to know why They think there's some media bias. Well, you're not doing yourself any service when you try to minimize the game at every given turn. Called it a Souls-like. It's not even a Souls-like. I actually did the same thing in a video too, so I'm actually not going to take points away from you for that. But I don't understand where this idea that this game somehow became something that the culture war LARPers had latched onto even before its release, because to my recollection, the only thing that I can remember is Games Media were the ones that were pushing these allegations from IGN against Game Science through...
Yeah, I do remember this. I remember there being weird allegations. I tried to find the article, but I couldn't find it. But anyway, there was something like a poor translation, or maybe even purposefully translated badly, like tweet or something from the developer, and IGN kind of went over that and made him look bad, something like that. So yeah, it's a definitely really weird past. And then Games Media quoted IGN and asked the question, like, hey, did this happen? And then Game Science replied and was like, no comment, you know, we're busy working on our game and trying to make it the best game it can be. So anyway, yeah, they got kind of turned down, and maybe that's why Games Media has decided to take them off of the running, because they got offended or something. Who knows?
Through different articles, and then also at the exact same time, there were a ton of people pining over tweets that were completely mistranslated.
Yes.
If anything, it was Games Media that was dragging this game into the culture war, not the other way around.
Right.
It's just not true. The entire time before this game's release, and this is the reason why I say the game didn't get a fair shake, is that every single time this game was brought up, it was always with a qualifier. Black Myth Wukong is a fantastic action game, but there was this report from IGN that was also based on some mistranslations, but we don't really care about that much. But
yeah. So that article from IGN is just marring the whole reputation and credibility of the game and the devs, I guess. You know, these poor translations, or possibly purposefully, you know, inaccurately translated messages. It's really fishy stuff. Yeah, why would they be taken out of the running for a game of the year when it's obviously an incredible game and it did so well? Better than a lot of the other games they're talking about. It's very strange.
Anyway, they said some things, or they do some things we don't necessarily agree with. Black Myth Wukong, we're giving an 8 out of 10, but just to let you know, we saw some tweets that were also mistranslated, and we didn't really like exactly what they said or the things that this company stands for. It was always like that. The game never got a fair chance, at least in the media light.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, they got this taste for it, or this bad taste in their mouth from the IGN article. They didn't do their own research, apparently, or try to translate it themselves, or actually get someone who speaks Mandarin. Like, come on. And then translate it properly? Is it really that hard? And so, just the whole, I guess, media opinion became, hey, it's only allowed to be an 8 out of 10, guys, okay? Nobody rated higher, because, you know, then we would be approving of that poor background in those messages that we saw that were obviously mistranslated. You know, so it's very whatever, man.
And that's not the same for every other game that was out there. All the rest of the games never had any of this kind of stuff. And the worst part is again, all of these things were alleged, never even proven, yet they were touted as fact. They were included in game reviews, game review videos, and reviews. You don't think that's too far? What do you think is the purpose of that when you put that?
Again, you know, the actions of the dev, even if those tweets had been translated correctly, which they were not, and it was proven that they were not, if they had been translated correctly, who cares? Because we're looking at the game in a game review, not the dev. The dev should have nothing to do with how you score the game. Really, it's not reasonable or fair to do that. It doesn't make sense. It's in the name. You're doing a game review. Game review. You're looking at the game itself. It's just, yeah, it's so pathetic.
That stuff into an article other than to minimize the game and hopefully steer players away from buying it. That's the point.
Yep.
You want to understand and know why players think there's some grand conspiracy? Well, it's not hard for them to jump to that conclusion when it's staring them 2 inches from their face. On the topic of the game's sales, the writer continues with, it's hardly a compelling defense, but sales figures have long been used as evidence that Supposedly anti-woke games like Wukong are what your everyday gamer really wants. In reality, it was a
Supposedly, anti-woke games like Wukong are what your everyday gamer really wants. Well, it's pretty obvious that it's what they want because they bought it en masse. Over 10 million copies across all platforms. That's really good. That is really good numbers, by the way. And yeah, like I said, a lot of these other apparent frontrunner games didn't come even close in those numbers. So, okay.
a success because the game was marketed to the enormous untapped Chinese demographic. It was only made worse when streamers were supposedly sent guidelines asking them not to mention feminist propaganda or politics. Black Myth Wukong became the poster child for the most toxic, vocal gamers on the internet, and everything since its launch has only worked to further that image.
I mean, they're from a different culture, of course. Of course they're going to have different things that matter to them, and, you know, maybe they have to be careful because of their government. Maybe they don't actually care about these things themselves, but they have to be careful because of their government. They can't help it that they live under a government like that. So, you know, they have to ask those things. Hey, please refrain from including feminist propaganda. Okay, that's just how it is. That's how they have to operate. Why is it a big deal?
Wukong was a monumental hit, there's no denying that. Within days, it skyrocketed to the 7th most played game on Steam of all time, the peak concurrent player count of 2.4 million players, but numbers aren't everything. Banana, the viral clicker game that generates Steam Marketplace items, has a higher 24-hour peak than Black Myth Wukong right now by over 100,000 players.
It's because poor people in Venezuela are playing the game en masse, trying to make money off of selling their bananas on this banana market. There's money involved. Of course more people are going to be trying it out. Of course. Of course. There's so many third world countries where people could make money off of that game. Of course there's people playing it trying to make money. What? What? Oh, the reasoning is so bizarre.
Avengers: Infinity War and Spider-Man: No Way Home are among the highest-grossing films of all time, but they didn't walk away with the pinnacle Oscar for good reason. Sales do not equal quality, but Black Myth Wukong has been weaponized in a culture war ever since it was announced, and it doing well has only been used as ammunition to argue that games media is out of touch with gamers.
It's not even an argument. It's just they're proving it. They're just proving it by leaving out Black Myth Wukong. You are out of touch with gamers, because we would absolutely want that game on the docket for Game of the Year. Absolutely. There's not even a question. Anybody who likes action RPGs would be down. They'd be like, yeah, Black Myth Wukong, yeah. Even the people who didn't play it, you watch one gameplay trailer and it's like, yeah, this game's amazing. This should be on Game of the Year, I bet. Like, oh my goodness.
Not being nominated for any Game of the Year awards, it's October, it's likely going to be in the mix for a lot of sites, and still could be up for many categories at the Game Awards, is just more fuel to prove that point. It hasn't upset fans because they think it's a good game deserving to be among the best. It has upset fans because they see its absence as an attack in their one-sided feud.
Is this self-reporting here? Or are they self-reporting for games media here? Because it's hilarious that they say it like this. It hasn't upset fans because they think it's a good game deserving to be among the best. It has upset fans because they see its absence as an attack in their one-sided feud. I think games media and the games journalists are in the one-sided feud here. They want gamers to lose. They don't want them to have their Black Myth Wukong as Game of the Year because they already decided that, oh, it's a bad game because of developer tweets and messages they sent out that were not accurately translated. They're the ones in the one-sided feud. We're just here like, we like our games, and Black Myth Wukong is an amazing game. It should probably be Game of the Year. Oh, it's not going to be on the running? Oh, why? You know, it's so bizarre they say it this way.
As we edge nearer the big celebratory end-of-the-year closer that is the Game Awards, we are going to see this outrage spiral. If Black Myth Wukong doesn't get a nomination for the main award, it has a few competitors to shut out in Best Action, its fans will see that as a personal slight. We're witnessing it already, and I've seen my colleagues get attacked over the past year just for covering the game. If fans are this riled up by an award ceremony many self-proclaim they've never heard of, or a list of frontrunners that means very little, then I can't see being snubbed from the Game Awards going down well.
Honestly, what it comes down to is if they're actually just going to be this out of touch with gamers and not even try to get in touch to, you know, refocus themselves, hey, what do gamers actually want? Then their credibility is broken. It's ruined. It's dried up, you know? Maybe it's time for the Game Awards to pass into oblivion in history, right? Because if they're not going to give us what we actually want to be awarded and recognized, what purpose do they serve? They're nothing anymore. They don't matter.
Man, the lack of self-awareness when saying that the sales of the game were used as ammunition in a culture war, while you yourself are focusing purely on the sales of the game to minimize the entire discussion around the game. That's interesting.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Oh, the sales don't matter, and then their whole argument for why the game is not on the docket is because the sales don't matter or something? Like, what? So backwards.
It's convenient to go after the outrage of those who can't voice their concerns properly because the writer is absolutely right. Sales does not mean a game should be Game of the Year. If sales were the leading factor, then Baldur's Gate 3 should have lost to Hogwarts Legacy, or Call of Duty should have won for 5 years straight since it was the best-selling game since 2017.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, and by the way, Baldur's Gate 3 absolutely deserved to win. Oh my goodness, such an amazing game. Basically rebuilt the CRPG genre. Holy cow.
There are a slew of other factors here that should be discussed, but the writer and other media pundits aren't taking the time to discuss that. They're just hand-waving the angry gamers and throwing it out into the bin with the rest of the culture war commentary. Now my question is, why is it that on the topic of game sales, the Chinese player base is used to minimize the overall impact of the game's sales success?
Yes, good point. Why are they talking about the Chinese market and saying, yeah, well, it's just for the Chinese market, so that's why, you know, it doesn't matter. It's not that good of a game because, you know, it's not just the American market we're looking at here. We're talking about Chinese people now. It's like, it almost, I mean, are they racist? Are the people, honestly, are the people at Games Media racist? Are the people at this article writing it racist? You know, like, how can you say that just because it was marketed or it did well with Chinese players that makes the game matter less in the running for Game of the Year? What? Who cares? We're all gamers. If we like the game, it should be Game of the Year. You know, if we like the game the most out of all games, it should be Game of the Year.
And popularity. Again, to quote the writer, the game was a monumental hit. There's no denying that. Only to follow it up with, but it succeeded because there was an untapped Chinese market of players. Like, those players don't even count? Why aren't we having a discussion on why, censorship aside, Western games haven't been able to penetrate that market as effectively as Black Myth Wukong, especially when there are that many players that could make that much of an impact on a game's sales? Black Myth Wukong is just as deserving as any other title that could go up there for Game of the Year. That's not saying that those games aren't worthy either. They are. But the thing is that it just feels like the coverage around this game, the discussions around this game, have just felt off.
Yeah, it feels like it never got a fair chance from the beginning because of those articles, because of the kind of consensus among media, among these games journalist outlets, and also, you know, games media for the Game of the Year, kind of in consensus with these games journalists. And so they all just kind of agreed, like, hey, we can rate it decently, but it can't be possible for it to be Game of the Year. We can't give the gamers a chance to vote for this game because we can't have this example that we don't like for being the anti-woke game, for being, you know, having this mistranslated, you know, history of bad press or whatever, you know, being a winner in the Game of the Year. We just can't have that. We gotta do something. What is going on?
Purposefully dishonest in a lot of ways. Black Myth Wukong was incredibly popular. It was incredibly popular with the Chinese because it was the first game that really represented their culture and history in a way that could bridge the gap between nations.
Yep.
Players around the world loved it. They connected with it. And because of that, it brought down cultural boundaries. We don't see that very often. It should be something that everybody should be cheering for and happy for. That is the...
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Any game that can bring down cultural boundaries and bring people closer together? What? That's a win. We should be celebrating this game even more. It's an incredible game on its own, and then it brought down cultural boundaries and brought people together? Yes, even better.
The power of this hobby. That is what it can accomplish at times, but we're losing sight of that. I think this all loops back to the fact that game science did not bend the knee in fealty to games media when they started hurling accusations at them, baseless accusations at them, and demanded an answer. They said no comment. That has nothing to do with the game or anything else right now, and they didn't feel that it was in good faith, and they just ignored it entirely. And I think that games media as a whole took offense to that.
That's what I was saying earlier. Absolutely. I think it's true. I think it's true, yeah. They just got offended. They got butthurt. They absolutely got butthurt, and they're like, okay, you know what? This game can't be in the running for Game of the Year. We're just going to make it happen. No more. No running for Game of the Year for Black Myth Wukong. We're going to make sure.
They didn't like that too much. They don't like it when their power and position is questioned, when their authority, or what little they have left of it, is questioned.
Yes, I'm glad he said that. Why do we need them? Why do we need games media? Why do we need their Game of the Year anymore? Somebody else start something up, something crowdsourced or something, because, man, these guys, what are they doing? They're trying to control the narrative? Like, this is scummy stuff they're doing.
This should be a game that we should be celebrating because of the fact that it broke down cultural boundaries. Beyond that, it was a game that was absolutely gorgeous. It was coming from a studio that this is the first game that they were releasing. It came out relatively polished, fresh-feeling combat, boss encounters that we've never even seen before, with attack stylings we haven't seen, environments we've never been in, atmosphere that was absolutely fantastic. They went out...
Yeah, the glorification of, like, kung fu styles in this game was insane. Like, just the pure, like, artistry of martial arts in this game, it was so cool. And we really haven't seen that kind of combat. Or at least not this good, you know? And not at this level, right? It's just so crisp, so clean, amazingly done animations to go along with it, and the hitboxes lined up with the animations so perfectly. Like, it's so good.
Out and they scanned real-life statues and architecture to try to make sure that the game had the most, you know, authentic rendition possible, and they delivered on it. The game was absolutely incredible. The stop-motion animations, the anime cutscenes, and a bunch of different style of art. It was great.
Dude, those anime cutscenes, really incredible. I loved them so much, I put them together in my own video to put it out, because they deserve to be, like, someone should be able to watch them all together, because they're just so good. It's, yeah, exactly.
Great. It was such a good game. But all of that isn't being discussed. Instead, it's all locked behind social politics.
Yep.
Black Myth Wukong was nothing short of a revelation for me. The game was a breath of fresh air in a world that is drowning in microtransactions and endless live service models. Much like Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring, it was just a straightforward video game that focused on delivering a great experience without the baggage of modern gaming trends. Selling it...
Yes. Another win on top of the multiple wins already. The lack of just over-monetization is just so refreshing. It's like I can breathe, you know? It's a breath of fresh air. I don't have to worry about a battle pass and doing dailies and all this crud. It's just a game, you play the game, and it's fun. It's so fun. Such a good story. Yeah, it's so refreshing.
It, at a fair price, really made it shine as a prime example of what players have been craving. A complete, immersive experience that doesn't feel like it's constantly trying to upsell you. Like I said before, honestly, it's just a damn good video game.
Yeah.
I'm not a professional reviewer, but playing Black Myth Wukong was an awe-inspiring journey for me that I can't stop thinking about. From the moment that I started, I was blown away by its visuals, its gameplay, its music. Every single boss fight felt exhilarating, and I found myself savoring every single moment rather than trying to just rush and finish the game. It's a game that didn't just entertain, it resonated on a deeper level, reminding me why I fell in love with video games in the first place. Now, with that said, the other games that are out there are genuine contenders.
Yeah, he makes a good point. This game, it really reaches a certain point in me. I don't know about other gamers out there, but especially for me, and it does. It kind of reminds me of a different age of gaming. It's like nostalgic, and at the same time, so new and so fun. Yeah, it's really so well done. It's such a great game.
I want this video to come off like Black Myth Wukong should be the only game of the year and no other game deserves it. Final Fantasy.
Yeah, I'm glad he said this too. There are other great games out there. And like I said, you know, maybe it doesn't win Game of the Year, even if it was in the running, but it definitely deserves to be like top 3. Like if they showed, you know, the top 3 voted for, it definitely deserves to be in top 3 for sure. Even with all these other banger games.
Fantasy VII Rebirth was absolutely phenomenal. Well, I know that there's some people out there that think the game doesn't deserve a spot because it's a remake. It's not. It's a full-on reimagining. The combat, the storytelling, how events play out, the music, the atmosphere, all of it makes for a game that's deserving of the crown.
Absolutely, yeah. The Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it is not just a remake. I mean, it really is a reimagining, right? It's not just, oh, it's, you know, really nice 3D graphics. Like, things play out slightly differently. The animations, the way they talk, it's so good. It's a new way to play Final Fantasy VII, that story. It's not the same experience, so it is not purely just a one-for-one remake or something. It is a different game.
Helldivers 2, despite its controversies, was for all intents and purposes the game to beat this year. It sold tens of millions of copies. It felt like a trip back to the old days of Halo 2 and Halo 3 post-launch, where friends are asking when you're going to get on, you're staying up way too late playing.
That was me. That was me, absolutely. Hey guys, are we playing tonight? Are we diving in for democracy? You know? Oh man, such a fun time.
The game, and all you could do was think about what was going to happen in the game next. I just recently started playing Metaphor ReFantazio, and I'll be honest with you guys, it's likely this year's Game of the Year. It makes huge improvements in turn-based games. It has music that has no right being as good as it is. The set pieces and art direction go from breathtaking to nightmare-inducing, and it has character.
Dude, I haven't played this game. I haven't played it, but I've heard so many good things, and I see so much good stuff about it. Man, this may be the Game of the Year, seriously, because, yeah, I mean, Black Myth Wukong is incredible, but apparently this one is too. And it like reimagines turn-based. It makes turn-based good again, basically. Apparently, I mean, that's what I've heard. It's apparently really good. I've got to play it. I've got to find time to play it. But yeah, it looks great. It looks absolutely great.
Character writing and stories that show quality, care, and the authenticity that players have been complaining for years that game studios can't touch without ham-fisting those themes in. It is the perfect example of how to do topics like diversity and inclusivity the right way. I just want to emphasize that this isn't about one game deserving a title over another. Every title mentioned has its own merits and fan bases, and they're all worthy of recognition in their own right.
Yeah.
Black Myth Wukong, however, stands out for its originality and its cultural significance, but also for how this game has been mishandled by the media.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, I agree 100%. It's just the fact that it didn't get a fair shake is like, well, why? Why isn't Black Myth Wukong in the running? Even more, why? Why are you guys treating it this way? Why is it getting just tossed out in the cold like it never deserved a shot? No, it absolutely does. It absolutely deserves a shot. And you need to leave that up to the players, to the gamers to decide. Not decide in some seedy little back alley where you meet up with your cronies or whatever, and okay guys, how can we screw over Black Myth Wukong since, you know, we decided that it's sketchy and we don't want it in the running for Game of the Year because of stuff with the dev not even looking at the game itself. Like, what? Man, the games marketplace, the games industry is just so jacked in certain regards these days.
It's a testament to how hard game science worked on their game and the fresh perspective that they bring. After all, that's what games should be about, creating experiences that are resonating and bringing us together, not just the ones that fit into a narrow definition of success that is made up by a handful of writers.
Yeah.
You know, I'm starting to realize that access journalism doesn't work in both ways. You know, because they want to make sure that they're trying to stay in line, that they're doing their best to be able to hold on to their contacts, their insider information, get their keys and their codes, and make sure that they can hold on to their jobs and their relevance. But on the other end, when it comes to some of these smaller studios and publishers, they desperately need the help of games media to be able to be noticed, to get in the front of the eyes of players in the first place. Get their trailers out there, get articles written and things like that, get them in the algorithms and whatnot. And I think that some of these journalists that are out there view that as an opportunity for them to throw their weight around. That's where they get to be the bully this time.
Yeah, and this is a reason that I'm so glad that things like YouTube exist and other sites, you know, maybe Twitch, I guess, for an example, too. People playing the games on Twitch to give them visibility and recognition. Yeah, it's really good that we have multiple platforms. Twitter even, you know, people shouting out games on Twitter and spreading it around. I'm so glad that it's not just these kind of legacy games journalists, games media anymore. You know, there's other options, and maybe it's time for that legacy games media to kind of fade away. They are dropping in relevance in terms of like Google searches, Google Trends. Check it out sometime if you're interested. But yeah, I'm glad that it's kind of changing. We have other outlets for these game developers to have their games seen and shown. Yeah, it's definitely a good thing.
To push everybody else around and tell them the way that it's going to be. And I think that Black Myth Wukong stood in opposition to that, and they didn't like it too much. And it might not be all of them. I'm not going to say it's every single one of them. There's some damn good journalists that are still out there. Yeah. I know you guys are probably shaking your heads. No, there's no way. Believe me, they exist. I have a few of them that are out there that are some of my favorites. But with that said, I think that's the case here for Black Myth Wukong. You know, it's not about sales and it's not about scores. It's about fairness and image. And I just do not think, under any circumstances, that Black Myth Wukong was painted in the same colors as some of the other games that we've seen this year. Even games.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. He's right. And any gamer who's on the internet, even just a little bit, would have seen this kind of whole context, right? Hey, weren't they bashing on Black Myth Wukong for stuff that, you know, didn't actually happen? What the heck's going on here? You know, it's very obvious that they didn't give it a fair shake.
Games that had controversy. Pal World, I mean, that game got absolutely shredded by games media. They hated that game even though the players liked it. But even still then, I don't feel like the game got dogged on this hard.
Yeah.
Going back, Helldivers 2, they went through their entire controversy. Games media didn't even want to touch it. They didn't even want to talk about it. They just brought it up slightly and then walked away from it. Just
maybe because Sony was looming over their shoulder. Hey, Sony here. What are you going to say about our game? What are you going to say? What do you have to say, games media? You going to say anything bad? Because maybe they're a big donator. Maybe, you know, you never know. You never know what the interactions are like. And so why did they not touch Helldivers 2 when there was also controversy? You know, it's interesting.
Let the gamers be mad. And I think the reason why is because they just didn't see it from our perspective. They didn't care to see it from our perspective. Which then brings me around to this idea that when it comes to a game like Black Myth Wukong, or maybe even like Space Marine 2, probably less so on that one, I think that there are some writers, some journalists that are out there that see that these games are being used in a culture war, that they are diametrically opposed to whatever the side of that culture war is, and they do not want to give them a win under any...
I absolutely agree. Absolutely. That article that he used as an example, oh, you know, Black Myth Wukong being used for like anti-woke, whatever. As soon as that's said, I feel like a lot of these journalists would be like, oh, yep, this is our game. This is our game to shut down. We need to shut it. We can't be too opposed to the gamers because then the gamers will revolt. They have to ride that line. But at the end of it, they're trying to shut Black Myth Wukong down. It can't get too much recognition. It can't be sold too highly, you know, because we decided that this is the game that's part of the culture war and we need to win. Our side needs to win. It's just, I guess that's just how it is, but it's ugly. It's ugly.
Any circumstances, and that does affect their review at the end of the day. They don't want to hand that over to them. They know that they're going to use it as ammunition against them and they're never going to hear the end of it. And as a result, well, points get docked, the image of the game gets smeared, and this is the result that you get.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going to be the end result of all of this, but it looks like it is. One thing the reviewer, the writer, did get right, there's a lot of games to be vying for a spot as Game of the Year this year.
Yeah, you know what? I take it back. I mean, I think Black Myth Wukong definitely deserves to be in the running for Game of the Year. But even if it was and it didn't win, I would not be upset because there's so many good games in the running. There's so many good games this year. It has really been a good year for gaming. Again, like I said, not a great year for the AAA studios. There's a lot of swings and misses going on here. Concord, ooh, you know, Star Wars Outlaws, the upcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows that has already been, like, dogged into the dirt before it's even released. You know, yeah, it's not looking good for AAA, but these other studios, they're doing amazing.
A lot of games deserve it. We've had some awesome games released, and there's still more that are right around the corner. Stalker 2 is, I think, next month. Yeah. We just had Call of Duty. Black Ops 6 just came out recently. That game got reviewed really well. It did really well. The players seem to really like it, which is crazy for a Call of Duty game, but, I mean, stranger things have happened. So, who knows? Maybe there's something else that's sleeping in the wings that we don't know that's going to come out and get a bunch of 10s and 9s.
Interesting. Really interesting stuff. If it really is a conspiracy and they actually just ganged up on Black Myth Wukong with all these games journalists, games media on board as well, obviously, and they, you know, took it off the docket for Game of the Year because of that stuff. I mean, that's just so pathetic. It really is. Like, you decided it's part of some culture war and you have to take it down so that it can't be a symbol. Like, oh, Black Myth Wukong won Game of the Year, and so, you know, the gamers won in the culture war. It's really pathetic if that's the reason. It really is. I'm gonna stick by it. I do think Black Myth Wukong deserves to be in the running. And hey, I'll just say it's my personal Game of the Year, right? So games journalists, games media, you can't take that away from me and my fellow gamers, okay? Thank you for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next video.